Welcome to the Teaching Journeys podcast, hosted by Dave Roberts. Humanity possesses a unique skill, the ability to pass knowledge from one generation to the next. This podcast embraces that ability, offering learning opportunities through conversations with extraordinary guests. Dave aims to leave a positive mark on individuals around the world. So before you dive into today's episode, please share this podcast with your network, including friends, family, and colleagues. And please consider leaving a rating or review. Your support makes all the difference.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Teaching Journeys podcast. I'm your host, Dave Roberts, and today it is my pleasure to have as my guest, Kat Polsinelli. From stepping onto a stage at 10 years old to stepping out of a decade-long abusive relationship, Kat Polsinelli's journey is one of courage, resilience, and transformation. Today, she's a sought-after speaker, best-selling co-author, and host of Real Chat with Kat, a top 5% globally ranked podcast airing on 4 radio stations and 2 public TV stations. As a survivor of domestic violence and PTSD, Kat speaks with raw honesty about the invisible scars of emotional and psychological abuse, the wounds that linger long after the abuse ends. She chose to rebuild her life, and now she helps others do the same. Her mission? To shed light on unseen trauma, challenge what we think we know about abuse and recovery, and empower survivors to reclaim their strength. Kat's work goes beyond inspiration. She delivers practical tools and deeper understanding for students, healthcare professionals, law enforcement, and anyone supporting survivors. Featured in Nashville Voyager, Canvas Rebel, and Her Nation, she's spoken at universities, domestic violence events, and criminal justice panels. Kat is here to spark conversations, shift perspectives, and bring light to the darkest moments. And Kat, well, hopefully within all of this, you get some time to sleep.
I do my best.
That's good because we all need our sleep, especially restorative sleep for the schedules that we both keep. But it's just a pleasure to have you on the podcast today. And we got to give a shout out to Noemi Barris. Noemi is a marvelous podcast guest. She's a great podcast agent, does her job very well, knows the ins and outs of podcasting. I believe you and her had a conversation on LinkedIn, and she was so excited about the connection she made with you that she felt that she needed to connect us, which is what she does. She's a great connector, and we had a great pre-chat and found some alignment on a lot of different areas, and voila, here we are.
Yes, Noemi is amazing. I love her energy. She's actually been a guest on my podcast as well.
Yeah, she's got a great story in and of herself in terms of how creativity really helped her get through some really difficult times in her life, and she's just a light. She just emanates light. She just emanates warmth. So I'm glad that she connected the both of us. So, but I have a few questions for you, and I know you probably got a few answers for me. So, but first and foremost is tell our audience about the experiences that have shaped your life path and your life passions today.
Ooh, I feel like there are so many stories that have shaped my life path and who I am today. But I would definitely say that the abusive relationship for a span of 10 years was definitely something that really shaped who I am today. And I say that not only because I share that a lot and I speak on it a lot and I want people to understand what it is and honestly how common it is, but also because of the experiences inside of that relationship. You know, I was 18 when I got in there. I left at 28, but I also had 2 kids when I left as well who were 10 and 7. And through that unlearning of who I am and losing that connection, but still trying to be a mom, and then coming out of that and having to re-figure out not only life and what it looked like to be a single parent, but also who on earth was I as an individual and not what I had been told for so long,
Yeah.
was definitely a complete breakdown, but also restoration of who I am. And it's been a beautiful journey. It's also been at times a difficult one, right? It's not always smooth. It's not always amazing. There was a lot of crying and anger and all the things, but I actually embrace what it is that I went through because it taught me so much, I feel like I now get to see both sides, the dark space that I was in and now this beautiful light space that I get to be in. And then I get to share that and I get to help others understand that as well.
Yeah, and you become a microcosm for anybody that's gone through abuse, especially with the dark side of abuse. And then you're there, when, they transform their perspective and that light comes back into their lives. And I think both of those experiences, a light and a dark, shape who we are. It's and you talked about the deconstruction process. At least that's what I heard you say, in terms of you had to really work through all of the messages that you got as somebody who was a victim of domestic violence and abuse. You had to deconstruct and really determine who you were as an individual, as a single mom, and basically outside of which the messages you got as a result of being a victim of abuse and domestic violence. And that's a process that I think we all go through regardless of the challenge. There's that deconstruction of self, because after any type of challenge or after really empowering ourselves to break out of those chains that once bound us, it's like, it's with a cool, who are we? Who do we want to be? What kind of a world do we want to live in? And what's that look like? And that work in and of itself is very arduous and is not linear, because like you said, there's a lot of stops and starts. There's a lot of tears. There's a lot of joy, but that's the path that we learn to walk. We learn to juggle both types of emotions.
Absolutely. And I thank you for saying that we all go through this process, because I think that sometimes people see others that have been through worse situations. And so they downgrade what it is that they've been through to kind of play it off or act like it's not a big deal. And one of the things that I was taught when I was going through my journey was that your story is yours and no one
Yes.
else's. And
Yes.
comparing our stories doesn't help anyone get to the other side. And, you don't have to go through abuse. You could have maybe had an interesting childhood. Maybe your parents were brought up in a specific religion or a different cultural upbringing. And so those beliefs became your beliefs. And now you're trying to figure out if you choose to believe those. So there's all kinds of different levels and things that we go through that, shape who we are up to a certain age to when we decide that this is not who I want to be or I want to choose to do something differently. And I think that that's the beauty of us all being human is we have the choice to choose who it is that we want to be on a regular basis.
And we lose sight of that when we're in the throes of trauma or we're in the throes of chaos. And, the other piece is generational trauma. I mean, once we make a decision that we are going to break the chain of those rules that kept previous generations and our generations and potentially future generations, if those rules are modified, once we break that chain, then we've established a new chain for future generations. When you speak, I know you speak to law enforcement, to students. What is the message? What's the core message that you give these groups when you're speaking about your situation and about ways that we can be sensitive to the needs of individuals who are victims of domestic violence?
Mm. So my core message when I'm sharing is kind of a twofold. And that one is that you are not alone. Because unfortunately, every single room that I step into, there is one, if not more, of someone else that has been through a similar situation, but
Yeah.
they haven't spoken it out loud, right? So that message comes across very strongly of like, you are not alone. I see you. I have been through it. So I share very openly, very deeply about the things that I've been through. But the other side of that core message is to understand that it isn't exactly how you picture it. And we have to remember to let go of the biases and let go of the stigmas that are attached to things and just open ears, hear what someone is telling you, to be curious to understand what someone is going through instead of allowing our brains to just kind of make up what it believes or what we've been told, and then shutting out the actual story of what someone has experienced. And, when you're in spaces like law enforcement and a lot of university students that I speak with who are going into psychology and social work or criminal justice, you're going to be in front of those individuals where you have the choice to either judge them instantaneously or be curious to hear what it is that they have to say and choose to listen to their story and then go from there on how you can help them. And so those are the two components that I really try to focus on in any time that I am speaking, especially on domestic violence.
What are some of the biases that you've run into with the individuals, who have been victims of domestic violence? I mean, I can think of a few based on my own past experience as a therapist, but from your perspective, what have you seen in that area?
So one of the biggest things is when you say I was in an abusive relationship or I experienced abuse, a lot of time people immediately think, oh, well, they must have been beaten. What we don't realize is that there are all these different components of abuse, and emotional and psychological are some of the most damaging. My relationship was a lot more focused on those two components, which is why I completely lost who I was and I became this person that I was told I was supposed to be. So that's a huge one. The other thing is that a lot of people will hear that someone has been in a situation like that. And again, the immediate thought is, oh, well, they probably experienced that as a child. They probably experienced it from family members. And that's why they ended up in that relationship. And that's absolutely false. Yes, there are situations where that story aligns. However, in my situation, I didn't have a bad childhood. My parents are still together 40 years later. They didn't do a lot of arguing in front of us. So I didn't experience those things. They weren't normal to me when I got myself into my relationship. There were other components that kind of opened me up to be vulnerable to be put in that situation. So that's another thing that I see. Those are the two biggest components that I see people tend to run into. And then the third one is, and this is a question that I ask a lot is, do you know how common domestic violence is? And I always get a really weird look when I say that. And it's really wanting people to understand that when you hear something about domestic violence, a lot of times we shove it under the rug, or the large majority of people that have experienced it never tell their stories. It is 1 in 4 women and 1 in 9 men that experience domestic abuse. This is not a small number. It's not 1 in 1,000. This is a common issue that is happening. We don't speak about it because it's a hard subject and it makes people uncomfortable. And so that's the other thing, is getting people to understand that it is not something that is uncommon. Unfortunately, it is an extremely common situation. 3 women a day are killed
Yeah.
by an abuser or a past abuser every single day. These are common numbers, and it's really sad to know that most of our population do not know this. And unfortunately, for people like me who are survivors, we don't even know it. So then we come out of those situations thinking we are the only one and nobody is going to understand. And there is a plethora of us out there.
Yeah, and a lot of individuals might know that it's pretty common in men as well too. If you're talking about 1 in 9 men being victims of domestic abuse, and we always associate domestic abuse with women, but it's
Hmm.
also the other myth is that it doesn't happen to men. Well, it does. It may not be as maybe reported as frequently, but it happens. And the other thing, I'm glad you said that because you know, and how individuals get into abusive relationships, it isn't all cut and dried. Some of that may be because they had that modeled in childhood, and that's what they knew, and that's what they gravitated to because that's all they knew. But that's not the total picture. There are individuals, like you said, have come from healthy, loving homes like yourself, and for whatever reason, you got involved in a relationship with an abuser. And the other thing you mentioned about different types of abuse, I can think of financial abuse is another one
Absolutely.
where the perpetrator just takes that person's their partner's name off of the checking account. Their name isn't on the deed of the house. They control everything basically by giving them an allowance.
Hmm.
You talk about vicarious abuse, vicarious traumatization. Individuals who witnessed abuse, that's the other part of that, are just as
Hmm.
traumatized as individuals who are the victims of it. And it isn't just that's who witnesses it as well that can also become traumatized. So it goes beyond that. And another thing that always used to get my goat is that it was just somebody said, well, why don't you just leave? Well, it's not that easy because particularly when you have kids, and if you have the abuser who's threatening to do something to you or the kids, if you leave, it's almost impossible to do that unless
Absolutely.
you have a solid safety plan in place and contingencies. And the other thing is if you have pets. I mean, I don't know how many domestic violence shelters accommodate pets, but they need to. Sometimes a person will not leave because they're worried about what's going to happen to their pet. And their pet has been
Mhm.
a source of comfort for them throughout the bad times.
Absolutely. And thank you for saying that too, because that is one of the common questions that we get. It's actually one of my favorites because I love to explain that if you think of an onion, you're peeling layers back, and that is why people don't leave. It's not one answer, it's not one reason. And people need to also understand that not only the threat of violence is an issue, but for people that have been in a relationship for, let's say, several years, they remember times when that person was a good person. They remember the times when they were able to enjoy each other and laugh together. We don't want to think as the people that we love as being an evil individual. So when somebody has this cycle where they treat you good and then things fall apart and then it goes back to and then they apologize and then it goes, it's really hard to understand and actually see that pattern in that moment. And it's really hard to create your own thoughts that are absolutely individually yours when you have someone who you care about say, "Oh, I didn't mean it. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, it won't happen again." Or, "Oh, well, you just didn't understand me. And if you wouldn't have done this, this wouldn't have happened." So it's this back and forth game that you keep getting played on. And it's not even with your mind, but it's also with your heart. And I've seen that a lot with people that are survivors is they care very deeply, and that is one of the things that keeps them in it
Yeah.
because they don't wanna see that person as a monster.
Well, actually, yeah, if they're leading with their heart, they're going to see the good in people. They're going to see that there's going to be some sort of redemption for that individual. And I think when they realize that they've gone as far as they could go, they start making a plan to leave the relationship. But it has to be gradual. Just it's got to be, like I've talked to my students in my classes about when you're working with somebody who's a victim of domestic violence, it's important to have a solid safety plan in place so that person can execute it when the time is right. And you can
Mhm.
collaborate with them and support them in their decision to do what they need to do at that particular time and when it's going to be the right time for them to leave.
Yeah.
How are some other ways that untrained professionals can really be a hindrance or of harm to domestic violence survivors, Kat?
I think that for anyone that hasn't been in that situation or isn't aware of how to deal with it is, um, oh my goodness, there's so many things that are coming to mind. I would say the biggest one is not listening. Right? If you have a friend that comes to you and is kind of opening up and you decide to put your opinion in, right? For instance, "Oh, well, I told you he's a piece of crap," or, "Well, why don't you just get out of there?" Or, "You know what? You can just come stay with me. Just leave him right now. We're going to take care of all the things." You're not allowing them to speak their truth, to speak what they are living into actual existence, for them to be able to process what is going on. When you are in those situations, you're in a very heightened state. And sometimes we just need someone to shut up and listen to what we have to say. And that means an awkward silence because it takes us as a survivor a moment to process, to continue to tell you what is going on. You can get more out of a person by just being quiet than continually talking over them, right? The other thing that I have seen on repeat is when you have people that want to help, and so they try to give them the answers, or they try to make all the plans and do all the things for them. You have to understand that when someone is in a domestic abusive situation, they have lost the ability of self-confidence, of having the courage to do what they feel like they need to do. And honestly, they're not really sure if those feelings are theirs or if it belongs to the abuser or if it's somewhere in the middle. And so there has to be this space of them building up their own autonomy again, right? So again, if somebody is sharing with you, if somebody is talking about, the best thing that you can do is build them up. I thank you so much for sharing me. I love that. What can I do? Right? Do you just want to talk about it? Do you need this? Would you like to know some resources that are available? I left my relationship not completely on my own accord, but I was also teeter-tottering on the fence of deciding what I wanted to do. And it was the conversations like that that allowed me to feel like I was making the decision, right? Because unfortunately, with the absolute best intentions, what ends up happening is when you get irritated or overexcited, or I'm just going to take care of it for you are actually speaking to that person as the abuser would. You don't
Yes.
mean to, but that
Yes.
tone is coming across that way. So in their mind, their brain says, okay, follow instructions, be quiet, do what you're told.
Yes.
Right. And it's an automatic thing that happens. And it's not that you mean it, but that is the way their brain has already been trained for who knows how long.
Yeah, and I was thinking the exact same thing, is that to take that type of directive approach, and there's a time, Cat, to take a directive approach is
Absolutely.
when that person's in crisis and they can't think straight. Then that's a time to take a directive approach. But once the crisis is stabilized, then you go back to collaboration and you go back to listening. And yet, I mean, I was thinking as you were talking that, talking over an individual who's a victim of domestic violence, who's been abused, trying to solve their situations for them, we're recreating very unwittingly those dynamics that they have had to deal with on a day-to-day basis in an abusive relationship. Even
Yeah.
even tone of voice, if it's like harsh, if it's like condescending, those could be verbal cues that the abuse is about ready to occur, whether it's physical, whether it's more emotional, whether it's threats of violence, whatever that may be. And so we as therapists have to be conscious of how we're coming across. And you made an absolute point about listening. I tell my students, you want to be a good therapist? Be a good listener first. You know,
Absolutely.
let the story unfold, empower that individual to share whatever parts of their story they want to share, find their emotional comfort zone when it's getting to be too stressful, and see what happens when you allow that story to come out. See what that does to promoting a healthy therapeutic relationship.
Mm. Yeah, and I think that honoring people being vulnerable is so important. I was actually teaching to a group of students a couple of weeks ago, and they're all in social work. And I was leading the room and getting everyone to ask questions. And I had this one student that I had said, hey, I'm going to come back to you. I want to make sure that you ask a question and participate. And he didn't say anything twice. When I came back the third time, he said, well, I don't really have anything to say. And I said, okay. I said, well, I just like for you to think on it. And so we kind of sat there for a second, and he poured out about how his mother was abusive to him, and that led him into 4 different foster care systems and these different things that had happened to him and how it had shaped his life and why he was going into to be in this arena. And then he asked a question right after that. And before I answered his question, the first thing I did is I paused and I said, you know what? I said, I'd like to thank you first for being open and vulnerable with me. And I
Yes.
want you to know that I honor that you shared that story with me, because you've only known me for an hour and you said that over here with all these other people. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
And then I went into answering his story. It's so important to make sure that we are validating people when they do open up in that space, because again, we're creating a space where they're like, oh, okay, it's not going to hurt to share. I'm not going to be judged to share. Nobody's going to shame me to share.
Yeah.
And that's how we get people to open up. And that's one of the best ways to help someone heal.
Yeah, when somebody shares their story with you, that's the ultimate gift, because that's a very intimate part of their lives. And if they trust you enough to share their story, yeah, I think the least we can do is thank them for the trust, thank them for being vulnerable. And, those are things that should not be taken for granted, because everybody has a story. The tragedy is the stories that go untold because people don't think their story isn't worth anything. But everybody's got a
Yeah.
story that's worth something. We can learn from everybody. And the mantra of this podcast is we're all students and teachers, so let's learn from each other. So, if people don't share their stories, that's one less opportunity that I have to learn from that person. For me, everybody's story is welcome, and all stories are significant.
And I think that, and I used to do that as a survivor myself, as someone who had been through trauma, that if someone opened up to me about things, I got really uncomfortable. And so I would immediately either run into something else, or I would completely agree with them, be like, oh yeah, that's horrible. You want to know what I went through? And so you begin to degrade what that person is trying to tell you. And it's just because we're uncomfortable that we do that. We want to just like fill the
Yeah.
space. We want to change the direction of the emotion. We want to get it somewhere else to where we don't have to sit in it. But if you can sit with someone in that, even for 30 seconds, it's so powerful.
Yeah, I mean, and a lot of times, and I used to do this as a beginning therapist, Kat. I would be so focused on finding a solution that I would forget to listen. And, if you're trying to talk and find solutions, you can't listen. So, it's just, I learned very quickly that the best way I could establish myself as somebody that could be trusted in a therapeutic relationship was to, hey, tell me your story and I'll just listen. And then
Hmm.
once they've had a chance to share their story, thank them. And then with their permission, share some observations, from that story that struck me, but also focus on trying to help them see the strengths in their story, as opposed to the deficiencies that they see in themselves because of their story. So it's always about what did you do well, not what didn't you do well. Let's let's
Yeah.
let's build from that. So, um, your TEDx talk, what judgment takes from us, what courage gives back. Tell us a little bit about that and some actionable tools that would be helpful for domestic violence survivors or anybody that's dealing with trauma to take away and implement.
So when I did my TEDx talk, what I wanted to do was incorporate my story of the things I'd been through, but I wanted something that every single person on the planet can relate to, and that is judgment. And we all have forms of judgment depending on what we have been through, the way that we were raised, what people have told us, what we think about ourselves. But what happens is that judgment takes away from our lives. So in my TEDx talk, I talk about the 3 C's, which were the 3 components that I really focused on when I started learning to let go of the judgments that were keeping me stuck. And that is courage, curiosity, and connection. So, courage for me is the willingness to face the adversity, the fear, the things that are in front of us. I wasn't a huge fan of the word strength because I didn't always feel like I was strong enough to deal with things, but courage means that you have a choice. And I think that we all need to remember that we have a choice to move through things, choose what it is we want to do. With that comes curiosity. If you can have the courage to openly listen to someone, then you can have the courage to actually get curious about what it is that they are telling you, right? So instead of allowing your brain to fill in the blanks because it hates having gaps, we allow ourselves to ask the questions to fill in the spaces, right? So then we get the whole story, which keeps the brain from filling in its own fears and judgments into somebody else's story. And the beautiful piece about that is when you can lead with courage and curiosity, that creates connection, right? This is what bridges the gap because connection is what we are all seeking. Connection is a form of communication, but at a next level, right? And so being able to lead with these 3 C's, you can uptake the way that you see yourself, the way that you can see other people. And so I always tell everybody, start really simple, right? I actually gave a tip during my TEDx talk, and that was this week, have one conversation. And in that conversation, I want you to have the courage to speak to that individual, but then choose to lean in with curiosity instead of judgment, to ask questions to make sure you're understanding what they're saying, and then watch what kind of connection comes from that. It's it's so simple, and yet we make it so complicated, but it does take the choice to want to do and hear differently.
Yeah, that makes sense. I like curiosity. I stay curious about everything, and I will stay curious until the day I die. But I think curiosity, like you said, allows you to ask questions. It allows you to understand the other person's perspective, and it reduces the divide
Mhm.
that is so much a part of our society now. We may not agree on everything, but we may see more similarity than difference because we've taken the time to listen and realize, hey, there's alignment on some levels. There may not be alignment on other levels, but the levels that we can align with, I think is a pretty good start.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that that's the thing that we forget is we project our judgments onto everyone else, right? I think that that person looked at me, or what if this person saw me and they saw this, or I bet that they think that this shirt doesn't look good. Those are all your perceptions of things that you have going on inside of you, but we push that perception out to everyone else and it reflects back to us. And so when you can lean in with the courage of choosing to not let your judgments be the first thing and ask questions, right? Things like, I think that you said this. Is that
Yes.
what you meant? Right? Or it sounds like you're saying this. Is that correct? When you can do things like that, you're reiterating to your brain that it's wanting to search for answers instead of allowing it to just come up with its own answers in a millisecond, right? And that makes a huge difference on how our perception of others then comes out across. It has made a world of difference in how I see myself and how I judge myself, but also the amount of space and time I will give someone else to tell me who they are and actually hear what it is that they're saying.
Yeah, makes sense. It makes perfect sense. And, I think once we take judgment out of the mix, it just opens up a whole new world of possibilities to get to know somebody on a very deep, intimate level. So,
Mhm.
the Lotus Effect. Tell me about the Lotus Effect. I believe that's the name of your business. Am I correct?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Mhm.
So, how did you come up with the name? And what is the significance of the Lotus Effect in both your personal life and your professional life?
Oh, I love this question, Dave. Okay, so we're going to go back to about 10 years ago after I'd come out of my relationship. And when I started the healing journey about 6 years ago, I kept searching for like something that I could connect with, something that meant something to me.
Yeah.
And the lotus kept coming up. And so I did some digging on it stuff because I love the flower, right? It's super pretty. It's always sitting on the water. And when I really looked at the meaning of the flower, they only grow in mud.
Yeah.
They grow in the dirt. They grow in the nastiest of areas. But yet, when they blossom and rise to the top, they're absolutely beautiful. And that was the effect I wanted to have on people, was to hold space for them to see themselves in the mud, but be able to rise to the surface, to choose to be who it was they wanted to be. And so that became the Lotus Effect. But it stands so true, not only in business, but also my personal life. It is something that I reflect on. I have lotuses all over my office. I have them tattooed on my arms. It's a very significant reminder to me that, like, it's okay. The journey is the mud, but once you get to the top, this is what you are. And it's just something that I use as a way to get myself out of the darker days. When we have bad days, it's something that I really hold on to. And it's just a really great reminder that everyone goes through crap, right? But we don't have to stay there.
Yeah, I think we have a choice. And for me, for me, my own personal journey with grief and loss, I had to wallow through the muck of grief before I could wallow through it. And so it's basically for me, that's my version of coming out of the mud and into the light of a redefined perspective that helped me re-engage in life again. But yeah, I love that analogy. And I'm sure that also, what other services do you provide? I mean, to your clients, are they mostly women? Do you get women and men? And what do they what are the presenting problems that they typically talk to you about?
Yeah. So the hyper focus has been educating those that are going to be in realms that will be handling those that may have come through traumatic experiences. So both men and women, because I have two boys and I know what my boys experience as well. And I think that there is an additional stigma for men of not talking about it, not feeling it, or it shouldn't have happened kind of a thing. So I want to create a safe space. So on top of my speaking and the podcast, I'm actually launching a community. It'll be launched in mid-May, and it is going to be a space where we hold people to who they choose to be. It's going to be for both men and women. I'm going to be doing some teaching, but I'm also going to be bringing in some amazing mentors and coaches that focus in the space of mind, body, emotional truth, and what I call self-reclamation. So coming back to who you are. And it's a space where you're going to be able to let down the guard, let down the mask, and just be who the heck you want to be, right? Step into whatever that is, because for me, I realized that I never lost who I was. It just got kind of buried a little bit, right? So it's not that I just completely changed, but I got to reclaim who it is that I knew that I was way back before I got into that situation. And that's the space I want to create for others. And I also want to have a space where people can come in and talk to each other, see where, like we said earlier, right, that we are a little bit more similar than we think, and provide you a space where you may be looking for a coach to help you through something, but you don't know who to go to. And I'm going to bring those trusted sources to you so you can take your journey and skyrocket it as quickly as you'd like to.
Yeah, what a nice atmosphere for courage community, connection. I like that. It's kind of like an extension of your TED Talk.
Absolutely.
Now, speaking of podcasts, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about your top 5% rated podcast, Real Cat Chat with Kat, and how it aligns with the work you do as an advocate for domestic violence survivors, a speaker, and an MC.
Oh my goodness. So funny enough, I created my podcast before I realized this was where I wanted to take everything. I just loved talking with people, but I quickly learned that we connect through people's stories. And sometimes the best way for us to be supported in a moment of difficulty or a moment of trying to grow is hearing that someone has had similar things that you have, and then being able to say, wow, okay, it's not just me. So my podcast is strictly based on those realms. I love people to come in from all spaces of the globe and share their stories of pivots, failures, mishaps, and what has taken them from there to where they are now. So most of them are entrepreneurs, but I have some people that still work in the corporate space and maybe do coaching and stuff on the side. But I really wanted people to hear and understand that you can listen to someone from Australia and be like, oh my gosh, they're experiencing the same thing I am, and be able to learn from that individual. That has been something that has helped me the most through my journey of healing from the abuse and all the things in between, was finding others that had experienced some things similar where I could say, okay, I see myself. I love that you are now doing this. Maybe I could try that too. And then kind of taking their own tools and tips that have helped them and kind of curating my own space. I've never been in a box, so I always had a really hard time working with a coach that taught one way and taking from it. So that's what I wanted the podcast to be, was it's a space for you to learn. It's a space for you to be educated. It's a space for you to connect, and you can take the pieces and components that resonate and then take it upon your way so you can do what works best for you.
I think it's great. I'm glad you don't work in a box, because one size doesn't fit all. And conventional wisdom, Kat, is proven to not always be the right way to go. It's highly overrated in a lot of cases. And I had a supervisor and mentor. He told me, he goes, Dave, there's some days you go by the book, and other days you take the book and you throw it out the window, because the book
I
doesn't
love
apply.
that.
The book doesn't apply. So I'm a firm believer in, we meet the person where they're at. Whatever they give us is what we work with. And it may not be what conventional wisdom indicates.
Absolutely. I've always been a rule follower. I've always been the person to be like, okay, well, if I do it their way, this should be wonderful. And I really have realized that you have to find your own path. And in finding your own path, it is so empowering to notice when you have taken bits and pieces from things and kind of created it your way. And you get to see the growth that is where you are today or where you are going. That is the biggest confidence booster than just following somebody's step-by-step program and into implementing it the exact way that they did. And I've done both ways, right? So I have to say that has built up my self-confidence more than anything, and empowered me more to be like, I know that I have the ability to search and find the information that I need, and then take the bits and pieces that work best for me and continue on my way.
Yep. And we can do that. We can take the best pieces from a lot of different people and develop our own perspective, or use that to expand our own perspective. So I've got another question for you. And this is going to seem totally unrelated to what we're talking about, but I'm going to ask you anyway. And I've been asking this
Okay.
recently of my guests. Give the audience an idea of what a perfect day for you would look like.
Ooh, a perfect day. Oh my goodness, there's so many things. Okay, so let's focus on if I'm doing business and personal together. My perfect day would be work out first thing in the morning, because that's how I love to start my day. Being able to come home, get a nice cup of coffee, sit outside on my back porch and just be for about 30 minutes before I even start my day. No phone, no electronics, just my coffee and the wind and the birds. And then being able to come in and teach inside of my community, have individual conversations with people that I can help raise the vibration of the direction they want to go, sit on a call and teach some students and get amazing questions asked so that I can help the younger generation see a direction and a pathway. and then ending that day with a walk in the evening and maybe sitting out underneath the stars and then hanging out with my kids and my husband.
That sounds like a perfect day in anybody's book. Thank you for sharing that, Kat.
Absolutely.
Now, one of my last questions for you is you've given our audience a lot of great stuff, a lot of great tips, tools to work effectively with individuals who are domestic violence survivors and have or survived other traumas or transcended other traumas. But if you're going to leave our audience with one ultimate takeaway today, what would that be?
I always love this question, and it comes with a different answer every single time. One thing that I would leave your audience with, knowing that even though it may seem impossible, you always have a choice to choose the pathway that lights you up, to choose the pathway that scares you but might be your greatest success. You have the ability to choose every single day. All you need is a little bit of courage.
And some support as well too, a little nudge along the way to make that happen.
Absolutely.
So, Kat, my last question for you: if individuals want to contact you and find out and subscribe to your podcast, what's the best way for them to do that?
Oh, so you can find me on all the socials at Kat Polsinelli. There's all the information. Please feel free to DM me. And then, of course, you can always go to the website. All that information is there. My contact form is there as well. And that is www.the-lotus-effect.com.
And I will make sure all of your contact information and socials get into the episode notes before we go live. Kat, thank you so much. This was a blast. I had a great time talking with you, and I hope we can do this again in the future sometime.
Really, thank you so much, Dave.
You're welcome. And with that, that's a wrap on another episode of the Teaching Journeys podcast. I'm your host, Dave Roberts, wishing you peace.